Chapter 51. Truth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 51. Truth. Translator David T. Editor. Cell. At this point, young Master Yang finally had a chance to speak. After furiously spitting out the mud inside his mouth, he shouted, "It's that little bastard who is setting me up, I'm innocent." He barely got the sentence out before he was viciously slapped by the ashamed Yang Kong-kun, who shouted back, "Shut your mouth." Ling Zhao's eyes were suffused with coldness, which everyone could see. To think that jerk dared to call my son a little bastard. Such a humiliation. To think he dared to be so unbridled even after carrying such a heavy crime. Ling Zhao could not help but want to step in, to teach him a lesson. Yang Kong-kun stood ramrod straight in front of his grandson, saying, "Although things have come to such a stage, all of us have only heard one side of the story. Doesn't everyone want to hear the other party explain themselves?" Standing by the side, Li Jingchong guffawed heartily, saying, "It doesn't matter what young Master Yang says regarding this sort of matter. However, if Sire Yang is not resigned to this fact, you can let your grandson speak out, there's no harm in doing so." Li Jingchong realized that the Yang family would be in quite a predicament this time round, and he could not help but feel amazed in his heart. This was an originally minor incident, of two children from opposing families arguing. However, under some premeditated guidance, what was originally chicken feed evolved into something which involved all levels of the imperial court, thoroughly putting the Yang family in an embarrassing spot. In particular, the person's ability to grasp the opportune timing, and his judgment was impeccably accurate, leading to such an astonishing scene. The most wonderful part of this was not the fact that Yang Wei was set up, but rather in which the timing was so precisely calculated that both the Yang and Ling families' reinforcements arrived at the exact same time. This was totally mind-blowing. One must know that if any of the families had arrived earlier than the other, the end result would not be like this. If the Yang family were to arrive first, then they would disperse the crowd of witnesses at the first instant and save their people. Only then would they formulate their counterattack. If the Ling family were to arrive first, the Yang family would also have an excuse, saying that all these witnesses were planted by the Ling family deliberately. The Ling family might even be marked with bogus accusations. However, now that both the families had arrived at the same time despite the distance being substantially different, the situation had also become more complex. Right now, both families did not dare to ask the witnesses to disperse in order to deal with this situation. The moment one side opened their mouth, it would mean giving the other party an excuse to strike, and say that the offending party had a guilty conscience. As such, either family could use such a scenario to turn the tables onto the other. And the most crucial factor was that even the capital law enforcement squadron was also called over. The moment the law enforcement squadron had heard that there was someone showing signs of rebellion as well as insulting the emperor, they immediately rushed to the scene, attempting to try and net some merit. However, it was unfortunate that they ended up as a pincushion against the fights of the two great families. If the law enforcement squadron had not appeared, both families would have brought their people back and forgot about this matter after fighting for a few rounds. Even if both families were to flip the skies upside down, the imperial family would still adopt the position of a bystander and not get involved, waiting for reap the benefits of both families' weakening. However, now that the team representing the imperial authority had already awkwardly inserted themselves into this matter, that former idea obviously would not work anymore. At this juncture, the only solution to this seemed to be to report the matter to the emperor, and await his judgment. However, the fact that Yang Wei had blatantly insulted the emperor meant that he would not be able to escape punishment. One of them was viciously scolding, while the other trying his best to defend the name. Both families were poles apart. At this juncture, which family the emperor would lean towards was obvious at a glance. No matter how this matter was settled, it was undeniable that the Ling family would gain the upper hand. Not only would they win the lawsuit, they would also receive the emperor's favor as well as his reward. On the other hand, even if Yang Wei would be given grace, and stopped the pursuit of this matter, Yang Wei's life would already be considered finished due to this tiny incident. Not only did the Yang family have to swallow all these pent-up grievances, they had to swallow them with joyous expressions on the surface with half a word of complaint. If they wanted to seek revenge from the Ling family, they could only do so discreetly and not out in the open. However, both families were already locked in constant strife with each other, so why would the Ling family be afraid of this revenge from the Yang family? Expert. To be able to extrapolate such a trivial matter into such a heaven-defying result, this could only be the work of gods or devils. Upon realizing all this, the head advisor, Li Jingchong, had a face full of reverence. As though he was witnessing the first rays of sunlight on top of a tall mountain, he looked at Mr. Qin. Though this fellow seemed to be law-abiding and scholarly, no one would have imagined that beneath this restrained appearance was someone who was bold and shrewd. One indeed cannot judge a book by its cover. No one would even imagine, let alone believe, that this matter was actually orchestrated by the teary-eyed, gutless child standing by the side. At this moment, Yang Wei was narrating the whole process in which the argument had developed. Then he said he was going to tell his aunt's husband about this, and let him take care of me, so I just. Saying up till here, he secretly lifted up his head to see his grandfather's expression, and tactfully did not continue talking. Thankfully, Yang Kong-kun did not die from anger from this. Yang Kong-kun repeatedly cursed in his heart. How could I have such an idiotic grandson? You would be better off not speaking in this case. In his heart, he had already understood what exactly happened. In a verbal exchange, it would be natural for one's tongue to inadvertently slip. If it were a normal person, that would be the end of it. However, the person in question was Ling Tian. The aunt's husband that Ling Tian had brought out, was someone not in the capacity of Yang Wei to even criticize. All the surrounding audience all felt the same way. If a child was being bullied, he would naturally look for an adult to protect him. As to why Ling Tian had mentioned his uncle in law, it was a matter of fact. In every child's heart, only the mightiest adult would have the capability to help and protect him. In Ling Tian's case, among all the people he knew, the first person in his mind would definitely be the emperor. This also meant that the emperor, to Ling Tian, was a figure he respected and was close to. Thus, Yang Wei's retaliatory sentence not only sealed his fate, but also increased Ling Tian's reputation in the eyes of the emperor. When the crowd separates, word of this would spread to the emperor's ears, and his impression of the Ling family would also improve by a few points. One would definitely think. Why would such a small child like Ling Tian be able to speak of asking his uncle in law for help? It could only be that their family teachings were good. Furthermore, this would speak volumes about the loyalty of the Ling family towards the emperor. It was the combination of all these factors that made Yang Kong-kun nearly faint from the anger. Such a small matter was reflected into such a big problem, and could even result in long-term repercussions. If one were to manipulate it properly, this would be enough to determine the success and failure of both the families. The crowd were not fools. After pondering for a while, they could not help but show a change in their expressions. In that instant it was as if all of them were suffering from suffocation, and they collectively sucked in a long breath of cold air. The suction was so great it was as if the entire street had turned into a vacuum in that very moment. As the commander of the law enforcement squadron, Wan Shifang, saw how the matters had already progressed to such a stage, he could only prudently observe Yang Kong-kun's expression as he suggested, "This matter is out of this small one's jurisdiction. Might I suggest that the two sires instead pay a visit to the emperor, and seek divine judgment?" The crowd remained silent. At this point, who could not guess what the emperor would say and deal with this matter? What so-called divine judgment was all a formality. However, the solution that Wan Shifang suggested was the only plausible route to take in order to solve this problem. Even though both Ling Zhan and Yang Kong-kun possessed enough manpower to overflow the heavens in their lifetime, they did not have the ability to resolve this problem amicably. The two old fellows exchanged a glance. One of them had an expression full of glee, while the other was angered beyond words, with a depressed expression. Both nodded their heads at the same time. Xiao Fenghan only hid behind Ling Zhan from start to the end, coldly watching on as a bystander. Having suffered from a disadvantage before, he naturally could tell with a glance that this matter was, without doubt, another masterpiece created by that little demon. To think he could still reveal such a pitiful look to win the audience's pity. Today's matter did not just severely wound the Yang family, it also greatly boosted the development of the Ling family. The ingenious part of this was that Ling Tian's escaped from the spotlight the moment Mr. Qin stepped out of the carriage. Thus, Ling Tian managed to continue concealing himself, with the brunt of the impact being taken by Mr. Qin. Such a brilliant plan. The more Xiao Fenghan evaluated the successes and failures of this plan, the more he felt as though that pitiful child had an intellect that was as deep as the ocean, vast and unfathomable. He could only suck in a breath of air, and once more seriously reconsider his viewpoint of Ling Tian. As he focused on Ling Tian, he saw Ling Tian turn his head towards him, the corners of his mouth rising upwards in a crafty smile. Chapter 52. Ambush. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 52. Ambush. Translator David T. Editor. The Emperor's decision was extremely swift and wise. He commanded Yang Kongkun to take his grandson back and discipline him well. Not only did he not punish him, he rewarded him with 10 taels of gold. He then comforted Yang Kongkun in an amiable manner. These are all just words spoken by kids. Rebellion. Ha ha ha, isn't this just a joke? Are both your elders here to crack a joke with us? This was what the Emperor said. In fact, it had a subtle meaning of, there is no need for you to trouble me just because of this small incident. It was as though the Emperor was completely unbothered by this affair. He then commanded Ling Zhan to bring his grandson back and raise him up well. At the same time, he rewarded him with 10 taels of gold and a piece of white rui, saying that it was to calm the child down. Before he sent them away, he also added casually, "Oh, my consort had told us that she has not visited her relatives for a long time and wanted to make a trip home." Apart from that, he did not say anything else. Both the old men took their grandsons out of the palace together. One of them filled with black lines all over his forehead, together with a vicious glare in his eyes as though he wanted to eat someone up alive. Another one was filled with smiles and in an extremely good mood. Although the Emperor did not say much, he revealed his stand by consoling Yang Kongkun. In this whole incident, it was obvious that Ling Tian was the one being bullied and the Ling family was the party which needed consoling. However, the Emperor did not say anything to the Ling family but consoled the party who was the perpetrator. This was where it was strange. Especially in Yang Kongkun's heart, it was completely filled with a myriad of mixed feelings. How was it possible for the sly and wise Yang Kongkun to not notice something strange? He thought in his heart, he consoled me, but gave him an extra white rui. What does the rui means? It obviously means that what the Ling family did was to his liking. In other words, he wasn't pleased with what my Yang family did. The more he thought about it, the more unpleasant he felt. If the daughter of the Ling family wants to go back to visit them, why did you have to say it in front of me? When they were leaving the palace, Yang Wei's triangular eyes glared at Ling Tian viciously. However, Ling Tian ignored him completely as he thought to himself, "Child, you're too soft. You're still far from fighting with me." Duke Ling left the palace in a merry mood, letting Ling Tian ride on top of his shoulders while calling Ling Tian his darling. It was as though he had completely forgotten about how Ling Tian had caused the Xiao family to reject the marriage. Under Ling Tian's insistence, Ling Tian had still followed Mr. Qin out to visit his friend. It was just that the time was delayed by a whole afternoon. Bdnvl Ling Tian sat on the carriage with a smile as he looked at the brilliant look on Mr. Qin's face as though he was laughing at Mr. Qin's misfortune. Mr. Qin was now extremely depressed. The whole incident was caused by Ling Tian, and it was also Ling Tian's idea which guaranteed them the greatest benefits. From the beginning till the end, he had not done anything and only sat in the carriage. But in the end, he became the biggest contributor to the whole event. Duke Ling almost wanted to worship him. As for those top officials who were usually extremely proud and aloof, they looked at him like a teacher respectfully, treating him as though it was all part of his divine planning. If he had really played such a role, he wouldn't be bothered by it. But the thing is, he was receiving credit for something he did not do. With Mr. Qin's rigid and upright character, not only is this not considered glory, it was considered a torture for him. In a mere few hours, Mr. Qin was already exhausted. He then quickly took his leave as he literally escaped from the Ling mansion, allowing him to have the time to wipe off the sweat on his face. At the moment, he saw that the mastermind of this whole incident was laughing at his misfortune. In a moment of rage, he did not bother about anything else and caught Ling Tian over, wanting to give him a good smacking on the ass. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, Ling Tian quickly said with a doubtful tone, "The matters today are extremely strange. There is something that I just cannot figure out." As Ling Tian said that, he scratched his head with a doubtful look on his face. Mr. Qin's hands almost landed, but he heard this sudden phrase from Ling Tian. He then could not help but ask, "What do you not understand?" At the same time, he thought to himself, "There is still something that you don't understand. Then it must really be something big." In that instant, his anger had completely dissipated from a single question by Ling Tian. Ling Tian laughed in his heart as he got up from Mr. Qin's knees and said, "The more I think about it, the more I don't understand. Strictly speaking, this is the first time I am leaving the city ever since I was born. But in this very first time, I coincidentally met the young master of the Yang family to fight with me over the road. Isn't this too much of a coincidence?" Mr. Qin was first stunned before asking nervously, "You're trying to say that there is a spy in the mansion? This is definitely something big." Ling Tian almost burst out into laughter as he thought to himself, "If this was something pre-planned by the Yang family, how would it be possible for me to gain the upper hand so easily? Furthermore, they definitely would not send an idiot like Yang Wei over." But, his face was completely still as he continued to spout rubbish. Perhaps he was just too good at speaking, making Mr. Qin extremely serious as he twiddled with his beard in deep thought. Ling Jian was still seated down in the carriage and did not seem to hear anything the both of them said. However, a trace of laughter in his eyes proved that he understood Ling Tian's intent. Following the respectful greetings from the city guards, the carriage exited the city and headed to the south. In the front was the Green Willow Lake. In the willow forest, there was a small river which was about 20 feet wide. The surface of the river was already frozen and it looked like a beautiful white jade path which spread across the earth silently. Opposite the river, there was a run-down house which was King Fu's courtyard. Ling Tian stuck his head out of the carriage as he looked at the large willow forest with ridicule. If I am not wrong, Ling Kong will make use of this opportunity to get rid of me. This would be the best time. The carriage moved slowly on the surface of the ground as it let out a creaking sound. The guards surrounded the left and right of the carriage as they looked to the surroundings carefully while slowly approaching the willow forest. All of a sudden, a whistle sounded as dozens of white-dressed men with bows and swords jumped out from the forest. In a blink of an eye, they were a mere 300 feet away from the carriage. The person leading the group then waved his hands as he commanded, "Attack! Kill them all and leave no one alive." With a swooshing sound, dozens of arrows with steel tips shot over like locusts in the skies. The tip of the arrows had a blue gleam to them, obviously being smeared with poison. 1. White rui is a piece of white jade. What rui means in Chinese is, according to one's wishes. Chapter 53. Fierce Battle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 53. Fierce Battle. Translator. David T. Editor. Sell, protect the young master. Ling Yi shouted as he jumped in front of the carriage and pulled out his blade. With 2 swings of the blade, he blocked 2 arrows flying towards him. The Ling family guards were all seasoned in battle and handpicked from the elites from the army. They would naturally not place a mere arrow barrage such as this in their sights. A few of them guarded the front of the carriage with the blades in their hands brandishing to deflect all of the poisonous arrows. There were a few arrows which could not have been avoided. However, right before the arrow hit the guards, it suddenly lost its aim and landed off the mark. There was actually not a single arrow which landed on the guards. As Ling Tian sat in the carriage, he held on to a small stone in his hands with an evil smirk on his face. There were at least 50 to 60 of these men dressed in white, at least twice the number of guards Ling Tian had. Furthermore, they were all well trained in martial arts with an exquisite blade technique. The moment they engaged in close quarters, the guards of the Ling family could no longer defend against them and a few of them began to get injured. Ling Yi was startled. He quickly waved his blade to force the enemy in front of him away as he shouted, "Ling Heir, I will take a few men to block them. Quickly take the young master away." The white-dressed men then sneered, "Leave. Where will you run to? It's best you all go see Hades together." Ling Yi was enraged as he pounced forward while brandishing his blade. The both of them then began to engage in a fierce battle. In the carriage, Ling Tian rolled his eyeballs as he mumbled, "I've asked you guys to not call me young master, not call me young master. You guys just won't listen and are still calling me that. Damn it." Mr. Qin was frightened to the point his face turned pale. After he heard Ling Tian picking on his guards over such a matter at a time like this, Mr. Qin did not know whether to laugh or cry. The white-dressed men had forced the 20 to 30 guards of Ling Tian to a corner as the remaining people charged by the side of the carriage. The man leading the charge then slashed downwards and sliced off the curtain covering the curtains, revealing the old and young men inside. The man then laughed out loud, "Kill them all." Behind him, all of the men in white gave a war cry as they charged forward together. But just at this moment, the situation changed. In the carriage by the side, more than 10 men jumped out of it all of a sudden. They were all dressed in full black with even their faces being black. After they jumped out, they did not say a thing but their blades stabbed out in unison. A few shrieks then sounded as 3 men in white had blood spewing out of their chest and falling down on the floor. The drops of blood colored the snow-white ground, as though the grounds was filled with blossom flowers. The glares of these few men were extremely cold as they had a pressing and cold aura. That was the bloodthirsty aura that was born from the battlefield, an aura filled with killing intent. The man leading the white-dressed men then cried out in dismay, "Not good, it's Ling Zhao's blood iron warriors. This is a trap. We encountered an ambush, retreat." One of the warrior then pulled out his blood-stained blade from the chest of the white-dressed men as his face contorted into a malicious glare, "Leave. Leave your life behind first." He then swung his blades as he charged forward like a tiger. The white-dressed men gave a whistle as they escaped in all direction. Ling Tian had always been seating in the carriage. Seeing that the white-dressed men, his eyes flashed. "If I were to really let you escape, then wouldn't I have let down this wonderful gift which Ling Kong had gave me after such careful planning?" His hands then hid in his sleeves as stones flew out of them without any signs. The stones carried with them a large force and they landed right on the men dressed in white. Most of them hit right at the back of their knees. Only after the stones landed was one able to hear the sound of the stones breaking through the air. It was more than enough to tell just how powerful these stones were and just how fast they were. The men who were escaping felt a sudden pain in their knees as they tripped for no reason. The blood iron warriors actually ignored the men on the floor and only gave chase to all those who have escaped. There were a few of them who even charged towards the direction where Ling Yi was fighting. Their eyes flashed with excitement as though killing was the only thing that could entertain them in this world. Ling Tian rolled his eyes, not grasping those opportunities, "Bunch of idiots. Ling Er then sprinted over with the guards as he shouted from afar, young master, are you alright? Ling Tian was enraged, almost wanting to send him flying with a single kick. His face turned black as he screamed, don't call me young master. Er. Ling Er touched his forehead in embarrassment. This young master really has a strange temper, bothering about such a thing at a time like this. Ling Tian then rolled his eyes, what are you guys still waiting for? Tie all of these men who are on the floor up. Ling Yi then walked over with a few blood iron warriors. His shoulder was bleeding from a slash as he grit his teeth in pain. There were a total of 56 men who attacked them. 19 of them were killed on the spot and 24 were captured while the rest escaped. Only one of the blood iron warriors had a light injury on his arm and the rest of them were uninjured. There were more than 10 injuries among Ling Tian's guards and 3 of them died from battle. Thankfully, most of the injuries were pretty light and would not hinder their movements. There was only one who had been stabbed in the chest and had a serious injury. Ling Tian then walked in front of him to check on his wounds. Shortly after, he could not help but shake his head. Such a big bloody hole on his chest. This is beyond saving already. With guilt in his heart, Ling Tian took a knee as he asked softly, I am the young noble, do you have any other final requests? Tell me and I will complete it for you. That man then stuttered as blood flowed out from his mouth continuously, blocking his throat. It was obvious that he was unable to speak anymore. He looked towards Ling Tian with his eyes in disorder and a deep sense of concern with a tinge of anxious appeal. Ling Tian then turned his head and said softly, rest in peace, I will take care of your family. A shimmer of light then shined through his eyes as he tried to move his lips. It was as though he had said, thank you, but it was barely audible. Ling Tian then stood up and faced the skies as he ordered, Ling Er. Ling Er stepped forward and said, your subordinate is here. Ling Tian then ordered without looking back, take out your blade. Send this brother on his way. Ling Er became startled as his body trembled to the point he almost collapsed on the floor. He then gave a loud cry, no. He can still be saved. I can't. I can't. Tears rolled down his eyes. As the blood iron warriors heard what Ling Tian said, astonishment filled their eyes as they looked towards Ling Tian with understanding. In the battlefield, if a comrade suffered from fatal wounds, the best choice would be to end his misery with a blade. This is the most honorable death for a warrior. They all felt it to be strange, if they were to meet with such a thing, it was only natural for them to handle the situation as such. However, it was Ling Tian's first time handling such a matter and he was actually able to make such a resolute decision. This made them all surprised. A blood iron warrior then stepped forward and said, I'll do it. He then squatted beside the guard and used his left hands to cover his eyes. With a heavy mood, he said, brother. Rest in peace. Chapter 54. Testing Ling Jian. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 54. Testing Ling Jian. Translator. David T. Editor. Cell, Poo. The shaft of a short knife buried itself deeply into the bodyguard's heart. It unerringly pierced the heart of the guard. Pu Tong. Ling Er knelt down on the floor, howling as he burst into tears. Ling Tian felt a wave of guilt. If he personally took action, the bodyguards would not have needed to die so meaninglessly. However, if he were to take action now, the plans he had painstakingly built would come to naught. Not only would it be a wasted effort, he would also become the target of everyone. Closing his eyes, he thought. Brothers, please forgive me. Turning his head back, his eyes had already regained their original clarity. Looking at the 24 men dressed in white who were apprehended, his eyes flashed with killing intent. A blood iron warrior moved towards Ling Tian, saying, Young noble, how should we deal with these people? Do we alert the magistrate or bring them back to our residence? Ling Tian pondered for a while, before replying. There's no rush, as the corners of his mouth curled up in a cruel smile. That blood iron warrior blinked a few times in confusion, before answering with a "acknowledged." He then returned back to his original spot. Their mission was to ensure Ling Tian's safety, and for other matters, he would ignore without exceptions. As for the matter of handling the captives, he only asked out of formality's sake, just like how he did so in front of Ling Xiao in the army. These 12 blood iron warrior, was the result of the discussion Ling Tian had with Madame Ling earlier on in the morning. Towards his grandmother, Ling Tian did not actually hide his own plans, but rather simply pushed the responsibility towards his master. When Ling Tian left the residence, Madame Ling felt extremely unsettled about it. Ever since she found out about Ling Kong's scheme, she knew that he definitely would not give up just like that, and would definitely make use of the opportunity to get rid of his eyesore, Ling Tian. It was only after Ling Tian vowed that his master would be by his side protecting him did Madame Ling finally agreed reluctantly. However, she still decided to assign 12 blood iron warriors by his side. The 12 blood iron warriors stood at attention before clearing the remnants of the battle without prior instruction. As they passed by Ling Er crying his heart out, their eyes subconsciously flashed with traces of contempt and disdain. If one could not accept life and death, he would be better off staying at home and taking care of the children. What bother coming to the battlefield to engage in killing? On the battlefield, every second would mean the death of tens or even hundreds of your brothers, dying in the most tragic ways possible. If everyone were to be like this crying jerk over here, they would probably end up as meat paste too. In war, time to mourn was a luxury no one could afford. One cry would negatively affect the rest of the soldiers' morale. As such, the actions carried out by Ling Er was a chargeable crime for disturbing the heart of soldiers. Taking in this scene, Ling Tian could not help but let out a sigh. Both parties were the elite among the elites, and yet such difference could be seen by someone who had undergone 100 battles and yet lived to tell the tale. He lightly spoke, they have not been baptized by the killings on the battlefield, and thus naturally do not have any self-control. Such is human nature, they should not be blamed. Hearing this sentence, a few of the blood iron warriors froze in mid-step. Turning back, they deeply stared at their young master. Ling Tian merely curled up the corners of his mouth in return, before turning his head to address his bodyguards, Ling Yi, bring the captives over. I want to question them. In a short while, all 24 captives were thrown in front of Ling Tian, forming a group. Each of them revealed a look of fear, staring at this delicate child in front of them which looked like a pretty lady. None of them knew what was going to happen next. Ling Tian walked up to the carriage, calling for Ling Jian to come over. As for Mr. Qin, Ling Tian made him stay in the carriage as he was afraid that what was going to happen next would contain more than a little bloodshed. Thus, he was afraid that the old man would not be able to take it. He even pulled the curtains of the chariot shut in consideration. Mr. Qin was deeply appreciative of Ling Tian's intention. Since he had some form of fear towards killing and bloodshed, he wisely decided to continue hiding in the carriage to recuperate. Kicking one of the short swords on the ground towards Ling Jian, Ling Tian spoke blandly and coldly, Ling Jian, this shall be your first test. I'll give you 2 hours, I want to have the answers to everything I want to know. As for the idea, you think of it yourself. If you cannot accomplish this, then you don't need to follow me back. Take a bag of silver and roam the world. With a ka sound, Ling Tian nonchalantly threw a bag of silver onto the snowy ground. He then turned back to sit on the pulling shaft of the chariot, and closed his eyes slightly, showing no interest in what was happening next. At this time, the 12 blood iron warriors had already gathered the corpses of the white-robed men together, and simply covered them with the fallen snow before returning. They realized that Ling Tian was about to take care of those captured white-robed men, but had actually handed over the task to a frail 7 to 8-year-old kid. All of them were flabbergasted, and immediately came forward to try to help. However, Ling Tian's voice traveled over, bearing chilly undertones. Nobody is to help. All of you had better stand one side and simply watch. Let Ling Tian do whatever he wants. If anyone lets out even a squeak, he can forget about staying in the Ling residence. Everyone simultaneously froze in mid-step. After a while, all of them awkwardly retracted their legs. The glances they shot towards Ling Tian was not only of amazement but also of some fear. Such resoluteness was something that even the great General Ling Xiao did not have. Eyeing the short sword on his feet, Ling Jian did not bother to pick it up, instead walking towards one of the blood iron warriors. Without prior consent, he stretched out his hand and drew out the steel sword hung on that man's waist with a chong sound. That steel sword was so heavy that Ling Jian actually needed both hands in order to lift it up. That small and frail frame seemed to be shaking, though no one was sure if it was due to excitement or fear. Ling Jian felt his heart boiling, finally a test in which he had been waiting for. This day has finally arrived. Not only was it sudden, the contents of this test could be seen to be extremely bloody. Furthermore, if he could not pass it and achieve what the young noble asked for, then, his entire future would be ruined in just this moment today. Dragging the sword, Ling Jian hung his head down slightly as he moved in the direction of the 20.4 white-robed men. His hair messily hung down from his forehead, dancing before his eyes and covering them. At this moment, everyone felt that this kid suddenly exuded a gloomy and oppressive aura. Ling Jian dragged the sword in front of the white-robed men. He solemnly spoke. "You guys heard him, I only have 2 hours. Thus, time is not on my side. I hope that you can voluntarily tell me everything that my young noble wants to know, then everyone would remain happy." Though his voice may have sounded immature, it was cold as ice. Hearing his words, a white-robed man coldly laughed in return. "Why should we tell you? Little kid, do you think that by putting on such a face you can scare someone? This daddy here came here today not expecting that I would live to tell the tale." A strangled scream suddenly resonated through the air, lingering in the atmosphere. Before he had finished speaking, Ling Jian's eyes had flashed with coldness, and the sword held in his both hands had unhesitatingly hacked down on that man. Chapter 55. Ling Jian's interrogation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 55. Ling Jian's interrogation. Translator David T. Editor. Cell blood splattered and that white-robed man's left arm was amputated at his shoulder. Fresh blood gushed out from the open wound like a fountain. It sprayed onto his accomplices, effectively blinding them. An intense nauseating feeling surged from all of them. However, those beside the amputated white-robed man did not even dare to make so much as a squeak. They forcefully swallowed back down the bile and vomit that was rising up their throats. At the same time, the glance they shot to the solitary figure of Ling Jian was filled with fear. The surroundings had already turned deathly silent. Even those blood iron warriors who were standing by the side did not expect this 9-year-old child to be so decisively ruthless in his actions. Not achieving his aim after merely one sentence, he did not hesitate to bring his sword down. Not like that, his actions were so vicious, crippling the guy in one move. The Ling residence bodyguards around were turning white in fear, their throats making gurgling sounds. Their Adam's apples were bobbing up and down as though in exercise, making them seem like they were continuously swallowing something. The blood iron warriors could not help but turn to look at Ling Tian, who had his butt firmly planted at the carriage shaft. However, they only saw an expression of blandness as he coldly overlooked the scene, as though the matter of an amputation was commonplace and not worthy of his attention. It was as if he had taken a look at the clouds floating and the breeze blowing. All the bodyguards on scene could not help but feel a sense of respect bubbling from their hearts as they thought, "These two fellows aren't simple." Ling Jian remained unperturbed, with the steel sword in his hand slowly dripping blood onto the snow as it ran down the blade. Plop plop sounds were heard as they landed drop by drop onto the snow. Coldly looking at his victim which had already fainted due to the pain, Ling Jian continued in a level tone, "My time is short, and I don't want to use punishment. That is too troublesome. I ask now, can you give me what I want? Don't want to use punishment. The blood iron warriors which were standing by the side, all felt like knocking their heads on the ground upon hearing this sentence. How else do you want to punish? One chop, and you already lopped off his arm, this is not considered punishment. Isn't your sentence a little too amusing? Ling Tian stood there, head lowered and sword angled down, silently waiting. As he waited for the white-robed men to talk, he silently counted to 10. Even after he had finished, there was no sound coming from any of them. Ling Tian coldly snorted in his heart, before raising the sword. He chopped down once again, without even looking his time. No, spare me. I'll talk. H. Yet another agonized howl sounded, and the second arm was separated forever from another white-robed man. As the arm lay on the ground, its fingers seemed to still be twitching. A few drops of the fresh blood splattered onto Ling Tian's face, slowly sliding off. It drew a few devious scars on his pale face as it flowed downwards. However, Ling Tian remained unmoving as a statue, not even bothering to wipe it off. Looking at the white-robed man who had begged moments before his sword cut away his arm, Ling Tian spoke with hints of apology. I'm sorry, you spoke too late, so I couldn't retract my sword in time. Though there were blood trails on his face, his tone was still calm, as though he was making daily conversation. It was as though he had accidentally dropped the teacup at his neighbor's place and was apologizing. Oh, I'm so sorry, I broke your teacup. Seeing this frail little child, a chill rose unhindered from the hearts of the surrounding blood iron warriors, causing them to shiver involuntarily. They thought of what they did when they were around 7 or 8, compared to this little guy who was waving his sword and cutting people as though it was common occurrence. Everyone had the same thought in their hearts, was this really a child? He looks more like a little demon. As for the second white-robed man who had had his arm cut off, his facial features were distorted terribly. However, he did not faint, instead rolling about the snow with his other hand holding on to the stump of his arm. Wherever he rolled turned into a patch of red. In his extreme pain, he continuously groaned, unable to even speak coherently. He did not even have the strength to properly groan out, only short breaths coming out from his mouth. Ling Tian only looked at him blandly, before tranquilly turning over to look at his third victim. He simply asked, "What about you? Willing to speak?" His tone was gentle, as though asking a neighbor what he was having for dinner tonight. That white-robed man's eyes were wide with fear, seeing this azure-like child in front of him actually throwing him this question, he was overwhelmed by fear. After letting out a squeak, he actually fainted. Ling Tian flew into a rage, hollering, F***K your mom, how dare you play dead. The sword on his hand hacked down and immediately blood flew into the air. His blade went up, fell, went up again, fresh blood spilled out unceasingly, and Ling Tian had already turned into a blood man. I'll speak. I'll speak. No, I'll speak, I'm willing to speak, please let me speak. The crowd of white-robed men jostled to withdraw, their faces already turned to that of extreme fear. All of them fought to speak, afraid that this monster would target them next. Their voices were so loud that even the deaf could hear. Ling Tian coldly snorted, pointing the sword towards a slightly plump man. You. Speak. On the point of the sword, sticky blood pooled there bit by bit, the blood dropped slowly increasing in size then dripping down. That white-robed man was so afraid that he started leaking from both his front and back, deflating onto the ground as he spoke, "Little master, no, grandfather, what do you want to ask? This little one will reveal all he knows, and if there's any falsehood, then may my family die an unjust death." Under the coercion of fear, he actually swore and cursed himself. Ling Tian's facial expression relaxed slightly, "Say everything that you know." "Yes. Yes. This little one is called Zhang Dehu, I'm a disciple of the Dark Night Hall belonging to the Violent Wind Gang, this time we are here under the orders of our gang leader. This little one only knows that this time we're supposed to assassinate a 5 to 6-year-old kid, and we were supposed to silence all others that accompany the kid. Other than that, then that. The more panicked he got, the more he could not remember what he wanted to say, and he could not help but start sweating bullets. Who gave the mission? Who paid you to do so? Ah. This matter, little one really doesn't know. Seeing how Ling Jian's face got gradually colder, the white-robed man Zhang Dehu could only beg for mercy, and knock his head on the ground as though he was smashing garlic. What is the name of your gang leader? How many people are there in your gang? Where is the headquarters? Locations of your branches? Number of people in your dark night hall? Ling Jian did not bother too much, so long as he thought of that question, he would spit it out towards him like a cannon. Chapter 56. Blood Iron Warriors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 56. Blood Iron Warriors. Translator David T. Editor. From what Zhang Dehu confessed, everyone knew that the Violent Wind Gang was a large gang near the capital which was formed around 5 years ago. It was even larger than the Blood Rose Hall which killed Ling Jian's parents. The head of the gang, Zhao Guangfeng, was a martial arts expert as well. In the Violent Wind Gang, there was a total of 4 halls with 600+ people. They were the Dark Night Hall, which specialized in assassinations and information gathering. Gold Jade Hall, in charge of all the various gambling dens and prostitution businesses and the largest source of income for the Violent Wind Gang. Tiger Leopard Hall, the force which the Violent Wind Gang showed on the surface in order to hide their true strength. Law Enforcement Hall, carrying out any punishments within the gang, also the strongest force in the Violent Wind Gang. Facing Ling Jian, all of these captured white-dressed men became as obedient as kittens and spilled all the beans. If there was someone who did not have adequate information, the others would snatch for the opportunity to add on with what they knew. They all looked to be extremely loyal, afraid that they did not give enough details in enraging this little devil. There was one of them who even said how many concubines the gang leader had and the sequence which he would find each of the concubines every month. It turns out that this white-dressed man did not have good looks and had a poor family. Even though he was so old already, he was still unable to find a wife and cultivated the habit of eavesdropping. As Ling Tian listened by the side, he broke out in cold sweat. As he realized that there was nothing more which can be interrogated out of them, Ling Jian stopped his interrogation. He then organized whatever he questioned and reported them to Ling Tian. Everyone then saw this small figure walk towards Ling Tian, his body so skinny to the point a gust of wind can blow him down. But, even the Blood Iron Warriors who were numb to killing and can laugh on the battlefield had a tinge of fear and worry in their eyes as they looked towards him. There was even a vague trace of respect. Ling Tian had already heard everything he needed and naturally did not pay attention to Ling Jian's report. But in his heart, Ling Tian was still pretty satisfied towards Ling Jian's performance. The process of the interrogation was extremely swift and effective. After listening to the contents which were interrogated, he already had a good understanding of the Violent Wind Gang. Furthermore, Ling Jian only used half the time which Ling Tian gave him. He can be said to have passed with flying colors. Without surprise, no one knew who the client for this mission was. They only knew that 100,000 taels of silver was paid and the gang received a mysterious mission. The only requirement of the mission was to kill everyone present. As such, before these white-dressed men took action, they still did not know who they were about to kill. It was only after they saw the appearance of the Blood Iron Warriors did they understand that the person they were supposed to kill was an important person in the Ling Mansion. At that moment, all of these white-dressed men cursed in their hearts, killing someone from the Ling Mansion in the capital. Isn't this just committing suicide? Are they tired of living? They all could not help but begin to hate the gang leader, Zhao Guangfeng, as well. It doesn't matter if we did not know, don't tell me you did not know either. For 100,000 taels of silver, you sold the lives of us brothers out. It can be imagined just what kind of a revenge the Ling family would take if this mission was unsuccessful. The consequences are definitely not something which a small violent wind gang is able to endure. To the side, there was a loud puking sound which sounded. The sound was so intense that anyone who heard it would think that the person was puking out all of his internal organs. Everyone turned to look and they were startled. That person who was puking while holding the carriage for support was the previously cold-blooded Ling Tian. At this moment, he could no longer stand up properly as he squatted down. He already had nothing to puke out as only his clear stomach acids were puked out. Ling Jian was a 9-year-old child after all. With the pressure of needing to leave the Ling mansion if he did not pass, he used the most extreme and cruel interrogation method without hesitation. However, it was after all his first time facing such a bloody scene. Especially since all of these were created by him. His stomach had long been unable to take the discomfort already. Now that the pressure was over and the bloody scenes appeared in his head again, he could not help but vomit. A trace of heartache then flashed through a leader of the Blood Iron Warriors. He then could not help but say to Ling Tian, "Young noble's training method is indeed effective. But to a child, it may be a little too cruel." Ling Tian was stunned for a moment. This person isn't simple. He is actually able to tell that I am trying to train Ling Jian. He then turned around as he looked towards that Blood Iron Warrior with a smile which wasn't a smile. However, he did not say a thing but only sized him up with a strange laughter. After which, Ling Tian still did not say anything but only gave a profound smile. This leader of the Blood Iron Warrior was puzzled as he also sized himself up following Ling Tian's gaze. Only after a while did he understand, if not for the life and death battles in the battlefield, will there be the Blood Iron Warriors. After he understood Ling Tian's meaning, he became silent. After sizing him up for a moment, Ling Tian had an idea in his head as he asked, "What is your name? What is your rank?" This Blood Iron Warrior was stunned for a moment before reacting. "Your subordinate is called Feng Mo. I am a personal troop of the martial tent." Personal troop. Ling Tian was surprised, someone like him was only able to be a small little personal troop. "Don't tell me Dad has these many talents." Feng Mo also became embarrassed as he said with a red face, "This subordinate was originally a captain of a 100-man platoon. But because of my bad temper, I had a conflict with one of the deputy general. In a moment of rage, I actually beat the deputy general up. In order to appease the crowd, I was demoted to being a personal troop." "Oh." Ling Tian nodded his head. "My father really knows how to abuse his authority for his personal means. Keeping such a blockhead with exceptional martial arts by his side." But the way Ling Tian saw it, this Feng Mo will not be satisfied by being a puny personal troop. At least, he can be a vanguard or division commander in the army. However, he was a mere 100-man captain in the past. It seems that Dad really has a few talents who are not well utilized. For such a talent to be a personal troop, isn't this such a waste? Ling Tian's eyes began to spin as he laughed to himself. Then, he asked, "How many Blood Iron Warriors are there in the army?" Feng Mo then replied without thinking, "There are a total of 120 personal troops such as myself who are called Blood Iron Warriors. They are divided into 10 sections with a section commander and 2 IC in each section." Ling Tian then nodded his head as he thought about the army's structure from the past life. In his past life, the smallest unit would be formed by 10 people with a commander and 2 IC as well. As he thought about his previous life, he could not help but go into a daze. As he saw Feng Mo staring at him with a weird look, Ling Tian broke out of his daze as he smiled. Feng Mo, you have already seen that my circumstances are also extremely dire. There will be people who will kill me anytime. I want to tell my father to transfer a section of Blood Iron Warriors over. I wonder if you're willing." Chapter 57. Plotting against the violent wind gang. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 57. Plotting against the Violent Wind Gang. Translator David T. Editor. Ling Tian thought to himself, Father has 120 of such people around him. There will definitely be many with nothing to do. It shouldn't be too much for me to ask a dozen or so from him. He should not really be affected also. Feng Mo was stunned, so this young noble had such an idea. He actually wants to steal men from his father. Only after being stunned for a moment did he say, there is no willing or not willing to, as long as the general gives his command, this subordinate will do anything. In other words, I cannot promise you right now, and I am also not very willing. The phrase, this subordinate will do anything already shows his unwillingness. However, as though Ling Tian did not understand the hidden meaning behind those words, he said happily, then I shall go back and tell that to my father and see if he is willing. Ha ha ha. At the same time, he thought in his heart, of course I won't go and ask him, I'll fail for sure or even suffer a beating. It is best to just let grandmother go and ask him for such a thing. She'll definitely succeed. Feng Mo was speechless in his heart. Don't tell me I wasn't obvious enough. This young noble actually couldn't tell. Black lines inevitably filled his face. At this moment, Ling Jian had already puked to the point he had no more strength as he lay on the floor while breathing heavily. Noticing that he had finished vomiting, Ling Tian asked Feng Mo to carry Ling Jian and place him in the carriage. At this moment, Ling Yi regained his senses as he said with concern, young noble, we should immediately inform the Grand Sire and ask him to catch the members of the Violent Wind Gang up. We should eradicate them from their roots to spare ourselves from future trouble. Ling Tian then rolled his eyes, by the time you thought about that, it is too late already. Catch the Violent Wind Gang. Catch them for what? It is all just a waste of time, you will not be able to catch anyone. Ling Tian shook his head as he said that. Ling Yi was depressed, why won't we be able to catch them? With all of their properties, can they possibly escape? Ling Tian was completely speechless as he scolded a while later, are you an idiot? If you were the Violent Wind Gang, failed to assassinate the young noble of the largest family in the capital and even got many of your men caught, would you still remain in the same place to get caught? At this moment, all of the important people in the Violent Wind Gang would have ran far away from the capital by now. Where would we find them then? The city would only be left with the small fries. What good would it be to catch them? Catch them so we have to feed them. What will they know? Stupid. After thinking for a moment, Ling Tian continued, if all of you had been able to catch all of the attackers, then the Violent Wind Gang would have disappeared from the face of the earth by now. Ling Yi's face turned red as he took a bow in embarrassment and left. As Ling Tian looked at the many white-dressed men who were tied up, he thought for a moment before saying, I originally planned to kill all of you. As he said that, all of their faces changed as they pleaded for mercy. Ling Tian then continued, now, I want all of you to report where you stay, number of people at home and your name. All of these will be recorded before I send you back. Ling record it all. Remember, after you return, do whatever you have to do. But if even a single of you escape, all of the 23 who remains will have their whole family executed together with them. A few days later, I will send someone to take over the businesses of the Violent Wind Gang. If you guys cooperate well, this young noble may continue to give you your jobs in future. I can also ensure that you will be better off than before for sure. Release them. All of the white-dressed men stared at each other blankly. They never imagined that this would be the ending. The person they were trying to kill was the young master of General Ling. They had thought that they would either be killed or imprisoned for life. They never imagined that the young noble would let them off so easily. Even after they were all untied, they still felt that they were in a dream and did not believe that it was real. Ling Tian then frowned as he said, all of you still aren't leaving. Don't tell me you expect me to send you guys back with a carriage. Only then did they regain their senses. Looking at the small body of Ling Tian, they all knelt on the floor, we thank the young noble for letting us go. As long as young noble is willing, we are all willing to follow the young noble. Even if we were to become your horses or cows, we will repay the young noble for your kindness. Ling Tian frowned and replied, become my horses or cows. All of you still do not have the rights to do so. Accomplish this matter properly first. As for the other things, we'll talk about that in future. Remember, none of you are to reveal the matters today. If news were to be spread out, I will hold all of you accountable. Ling Tian intentionally did not reject them completely, leaving them with a glimmer of hope. All of the white-dressed men were elated as they gave their word to Ling Tian. They had also heard that all of the higher echelons within the Violent Wind gang would be gone for sure. When they return, their safety would definitely not be an issue. After giving thanks, they supported each other and left. Ling Tian looked at their unsteady figures and frowned. Then, he shouted, come back. All of them were shocked as they turned back. Ling Tian then pointed at a bag of silver which he threw on the ground, take these silver with you. Give more to those who lost their limbs. All of the white-dressed men were extremely thankful, with some of the more emotional ones even crying. They then picked up the silver on the floor and left. The guards of the Ling family and the Blood Iron warriors were all extremely puzzled. All of these white-dressed men were all extremely vile and evil creatures. After interrogating any news from them, they should be executed on the spot. At the very least, they should be sent to the authorities. Why were they released so easily? Isn't this going too easy on them? Looking at their puzzled faces, Ling Tian could not help but silently scold them for being stupid in his heart. This Violent Wind gang is just an ordinary gang. But if they were in the hands of my Ling family, they would become the largest gang in the capital in a short time. At that time, the Ling mansion would have another source of income and more information. The gambling dens and prostitution business which the Violent Wind gang had was not just wealth. It was also the fastest way to get news. At that time, I am completely confident that I will be able to control this gang to grasp all the news within the capital. This is not something which can be measured by wealth. With the strength of the Ling family now, if they had an underground strength like the Violent Wind gang, it was akin to adding wings to a tiger. The biggest problem now was that Ling Tian had to find someone who he can trust to be the gang leader. Only after that would he worry about growing the gang. Ling Tian touched his chin as he looked at the Blood Iron warriors. After looking at them for a moment, he could not help but chuckle. His smile was just so devious. After Ling Tian and his guards crossed the lake and entered the forest, a figure suddenly appeared. Looking at the carriage which was long gone, he thought for a moment and let out an inaudible sigh. Then, he rushed back to the capital at full speed. Chapter 58. King Fu's Courtyard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 58. King Fu's Courtyard. Translator David T. Editor. Cell. Looking from afar, King Fu's courtyard looked like a black shadowy ruin. However, when Ling Tian and group approached it, they collectively sucked in a breath of cold air. Firstly, this courtyard of King Fu occupied a space that was large beyond imagination. Based on Ling Tian's estimates, it should be more than 1 hectare in length, bigger than the current Ling residence by at least 2 times. Secondly, was the damage caused to the courtyard. It had long exceeded even Mr. Qin's, it just needs a bit of refurbishing, following which it can be used. Estimates. Broken tiles were strewn everywhere, and more than half of the walls had already collapsed, with weeds overgrowing the entire place. Whatever spare materials that could be used for rebuilding had long disappeared, to the point that even the glazed roof tiles had been totally scavenged off. Occasionally, one could see a beggar dressed in rags, appearing from the ruins with a hair looking like reeds. They would all stare at the group of high-rank nobility in fear, and would quickly duck back into the ruins with a swoosh sound, never to show their faces again. As everyone followed Ling Tian to walk on the original alleyway which was now unfit for people to walk across, a nauseating stench assailed their noses. Ever since people stopped showing interest in this King Fu's courtyard, it turned into a temporary shelter for the refugees and beggars. Furthermore, it was obvious from a glance that excrement lay all over the place. A look of embarrassment and shame appeared on Mr. Qin's face. Not only him, the remaining bodyguards, including Ling Yi and the Blood Iron Warriors, all furrowed their brows. This broken-down land disgusted people at a glance, making people want to take a detour instead of walking through it. There seemed to be no value in this land at all. Ling Tian however remained passive, striding amongst the ruins of the courtyard, sizing up every corner, as if he did not smell the fishy stench which was vomit-inducing. What he looked at was not this scenery of defeat and desolation, but rather the prototype and design used in the previous construction of the entire courtyard. On the left, there seems to have been plans to erect a library there. The front should be the main residence of the king, and seeing the supports on the right, with the random placement of the artificial hills, it should have been a garden. The back palace hall seemed to be slightly higher than the main, with around 3 stories. Looks like King Fu also had a daughter. This delicately designed building was obviously an embroidery room. What made Ling Tian happiest was that all the way at the rear of this plot of land was an empty plot of land, with an obvious separation from the palaces. Right now, it was overgrown with weeds, with no former semblance, yet in Ling Tian's eyes, this should have been a martial arts practice ground. It would be the perfect place to drill any soldiers. At the front of King Fu's courtyard, greenery as well as the river circled around it like a belt, and one could see a willow tree grove from afar. The courtyard was situated directly beside Mount Victory. While the mountain was not particularly towering, its rear was filled with steep and precipitous cliffs. Other than coming in from the front where the mountain had gentle slopes, those who tried going from the rear only had one ending, death no matter man or beast. There was no possibility of getting up even by a rope, which made for an exceptionally good protective screen. Looking at this position, Mount Victory was likely to be considered inside the territory of King Fu's courtyard. With mountains on one side and a river on the other side, this was indeed an ideal place to stay at. The more Ling Tian observed, the more satisfied he was. While restoration and renovation would be quite a hefty sum, it would definitely turn into the most exceptional base of operations one could have once it was repaired. Thinking up till here, Ling Tian could not help but feel surprised. I'm not the only one in the city who has foresight, so why has nobody made inquiries regarding this place? Seeing that the sky had gotten dark, with the sun already setting, Ling Tian decided to rush back through the night to the Ling residence. This time, his enemies were not aware of the existence of the Blood Iron Warriors, and thus suffered a disadvantage. Were they to organize another counter-attack, it would be unlikely for his men would not be able to get out alive. After checking out King Fu's courtyard, Ling Tian was pleased. If he intended to secretly train up a group of elite soldiers, this would be the best place to do so. First was that this place was easy to defend and hard to attack. Secondly, this place was less than 20 miles away from the capital, not too far away from his own Ling residence. As for the problem of silver, it seemed like Ling Tian was not too concerned about it, as though his own assets were being thrown out like flowers blossoming. The only problem was that he could not attract anyone with ambitions over here. Furrowing his brows, Ling Tian thought of half a day before finally laughing wickedly to himself. Looks like he had to ask his grandfather to abuse his official authority for his own private interests, and build another Ling family courtyard. Since his actions would never be low-key, then, might as well blow the whole matter up. If he were to secretly construct such a huge courtyard residence, this would bring about suspicion as well as criticism. However, if he were to brazenly do so, there would instead be nobody gossiping. For the Ling family's current position, building another courtyard was no big matter. However, he had to trouble his grandmother again, and this might lead to her unearthing more secrets about him. The only difference now was that Ling Tian was no longer scared since he had a baseless master behind the scenes to fall back on. No matter what it was, he could just to push everything to that master. Ling Tian was finally free from worries. Taking a look at his people, he found all of them wrinkling their noses, and could not help but smile and ask, "Is the smell that bad?" Ling Yi seemed like he was going to wrinkle his nose and eyes together, and replied with a bitter face, "Young noble, this smell is not the best one can sniff. This smell is thicker than the latrine in the army camps." Feng Imo held his nose, and spoke approvingly, "That's right, the smell here is more complex." Ling Yi was astounded. "Complex? Don't tell me the latrine smell is pure and clean." Hearing those two fellows actually start debating about the smell of the latrine, the audience felt their stomachs rolling. A few of the blood iron warriors as well as the bodyguard started to verbally abuse them. Ling Tian guffawed in laughter, before making his way out, saying, "You guys can slowly discuss, the rest of us will move out of here first. Who would want to stay any longer in this type of place?" As such, the group all followed Ling Tian, rushing towards the outside like a swarm of bees. Just as they were about to step out of the courtyard, Ling Tian suddenly halted in his steps. On his left, a tiny and frail silhouette staggered out in front of the crowd's eyes. With her head lowered and waist bent, as though searching for something on the ground. As the sun had just set, there was still a thread of light to be seen. Everyone saw clearly that it was a roughly 7 to 8-year-old skinny little girl, with an emaciated body almost bereft of strength. She swayed as she dug around the piled-up snow, holding on to a sharp piece of roof tile in her hand. Ling Tian could guarantee that this little girl was searching for wild roots that could sate her hunger, from those few grasses she was clutching in her right hand. He drew in a deep breath. At this current freezing weather, how could there still have wild vegetables? In that moment, Ling Tian felt as though he was reliving his past life. It was the 2 years after being crippled, where he was expelled out of his house. He who was full of injuries had not a penny to his name. While he tried to find work, trying to eke out a living, he was always rejected. It was only later on that he found out, Ling Chao had actually warned all the businessmen that if anyone were to help Ling Tian, they would receive the aftermath of the Ling family's fury. Under such circumstances, who would be willing to help him? The only person who had pitied Ling Tian and given him 3 steamed buns, that old man had his legs broken. Later on, Ling Tian was filled with vengeance in his heart. Spurred on by it, he chose to beg in order to survive to get his revenge. However, even when he was begging, the surrounding beggars also came to disrupt him, banishing him from that area. Furthermore, Ling Chao and his men came every few days to humiliate him, to scold and beat him. That 2 years, there was not a single day where Ling Tian's wounds ever healed. In the end, Ling Tian's hunger knew no bounds. In order to survive, he behaved like a tramp, huddling in a corner of a market, enduring the criticism and disdain of people, to collect those thrown-away vegetables to allay his hunger. This kind of lifestyle, he actually lived for 2 years. Seeing this little girl, it was as if he was looking at a mirror image of himself in his past life. Ling Tian stood there in a daze, his eyes full of unshed tears. Everyone just saw Ling Tian suddenly stopping, dumbly staring at that little girl. Their faces all revealed expressions of sympathy and could not help but accompany him silently. All of them were thinking, to think this domineering young master would actually have his moments of compassion. Ling Tian sighed, before saying, "Bring the little girl over." Chapter 59. Last Ling Chin. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 59. Last Ling Chin. Translator. David T. Editor. Ling Tian looked at the girl in front of him. She was dressed in a set of long robes which looked as though they belonged to an adult. The robe was full of colorful patches, showing the signs of being mended many times. There were some parts of the robes which were split apart, revealing her skin which had turned purple from the cold. At the same time, her face was yellow and she was skinny to the point a light gust of wind can topple her. Her hair also turned yellow, displaying the signs of malnutrition for a long period of time, while her face was full of dirt and her original appearance could not longer be seen. Her large black eyes stared at Ling Tian in fear as her body began to tremble. Ling Tian stared at her for a moment and suddenly took off his jacket to wrap her up in it. The girl immediately took a step back as she became flustered. Ling Yi, who was behind Ling Tian, was startled as he quickly took his coat to cover Ling Tian with a grumble. Ling Tian stared at him coldly, causing Ling Yi to tremble as he took a step back and shut his mouth. Ling Tian then squatted down and asked the girl tenderly, "What is your name? Where are your parents?" The girl was wrapped up in Ling Tian's jacket, which still had his body temperature, feeling a sense of inexpiable warmth. As she heard what Ling Tian asked her, her eyes began to turn red as she whimpered, "Daddy, Mummy, they, woo, they died already. They died from the cold, died from hunger, woo. Ling Tian then said gently, don't cry. When did all these happen?" As he said that, he wiped the tears off the face, not bothered about the filth on her face at all. The little girl's face was lifted up by Ling Tian's warm hands, as she felt a wave of comfort course through her whole body. She also began to calm down and said, "It's the day before yesterday. I was freezing when Daddy and Mummy gave me all their clothes. Woo, they gave me all they had to eat, woo, they were originally sick already." Ling Tian's body shook as he asked, "What is your name?" The little girl said with a sob, I'm called Xiaoya." Ling Tian then replied with a, "Well," before continuing, "Xiaoya, right. Xiaoya, why not you follow me in future? I will make sure you can eat your fill every day." The little girl's face became filled with tears and she knelt down. "I thank the young master for his kindness. Xiaoya is willing to be young master's slave, serving young master for the rest of my life." The little girl knew that this young master in front of her is someone compassionate. If she were to miss this opportunity, she will definitely freeze to death in this pile of ruins. The guards who were behind Ling Tian heard the lass say, "Young master," a few times and could not help but secretly lament in their hearts, "Lass, of all the way to address him, you chose to call him young master. This young master of ours hate others to call him that the most. It seems that you have just buried the only hope which you just found." But what made them surprised was the fact that Ling Tian was completely unbothered as he nodded with a smile. Then, he turned around and instructed, "Ling Er, take a few men to follow Xiaoya. Bury her parents and make a marking. Ling Yi, go to the carriage and fetch my dessert box over." The both of them acknowledged and went their own way. Especially Ling Yi, who was filled with gratitude. For Ling Tian to ask him to fetch the dessert box after giving his own coat to the young master, it was also akin to asking him to fetch another coat for himself. Ling Tian sat in the carriage as he stared blankly towards the front. As Mr. Qin and Ling Jian saw his expression, they did not dare to say anything, afraid that they would disrupt him. Mr. Qin felt that Ling Tian who was in front of him now had an inexpiable temperament currently. It was as though he was reminiscing, but yet there was a sense of desolation accompanied with a deep melancholy and a strong sense of loneliness. For these few emotions to be gathered upon the young Ling Tian, it formed an inexpiable and complex expression on Ling Tian's face. Mr. Qin was secretly startled at just what could make this 5-year-old child have such heavy emotions. In Mr. Qin's eyes, there were always strange expressions on Ling Tian's face. Ever since Ling Tian had trusted Mr. Qin, he would display these emotions more and more frequently in front of him. Mr. Qin always had a feeling that Ling Tian was extremely lonely. It was as though Ling Tian would still be alone even if he was on the bustling streets or in a 10,000-man army. Such a unique temperament was something which no one could imitate and belonged solely to Ling Tian. This was also why Mr. Qin guessed that Ling Tian was part of the mandate of heaven. No one could imagine that this sense of loneliness which Ling Tian felt was something which he carried alongside him ever since birth. Even if he were to have a whole mansion full of concubine and descendants in future, it would not change anything. As long as he thought about the things that happened in his past life, Ling Tian's soul would still be alone in this world. Crossing through worlds. Ling Tian's laughed bitterly to himself. Countless of web novels praised the benefits of crossing through worlds, as though every one of them would end up being unparalleled experts in the new world they went to. This was something that Ling Tian agreed. If they were not able to accomplish anything with the vast amount of knowledge which they had from the thousands of years of accumulation, they should just buy a piece of tofu to commit suicide before crossing back to their own world. However, behind the amazing legends of these people, who would understand the loneliness these people felt? That was a devil in the heart which can never be avoided. I did not have a single day which I enjoyed in my past life, suffering from bullying and humiliation. Now that I crossed to another world, I am already suffering so much. I really wonder how much pain and suffering those people with a perfect family in their previous life would have suffered after crossing through worlds. Young noble, your subordinate has brought Xiaoya over. What arrangements does young noble has for her? Please give me an instruction. Just when Ling Tian was daydreaming, he heard the respectful voice of Ling Er. Ling Tian raised the curtains and saw that it was getting dark. Then, he said, send her into the carriage. Ling Er acknowledged and a small little head entered the carriage. It can be seen that Ling Er had already washed her up before sending her up the carriage. At least her hair was not as messy as before. But Ling Er's hands were really extremely clumsy. He insisted on helping the girl tie a hair full of braids which looked extremely weird. Xiaoya then held the braids in her hand with an angry face. All girls were born vain and Xiaoya was no exception. It doesn't matter if she did not have the ability to do so. Now that she had the ability and someone messed up her hair as such, she was obviously unhappy. The moment Xiaoya saw Ling Tian, she could not help but have her mood lifted up. In her little heart, there was already a thought, as long as I am by Ling Tian's side, I will definitely be extremely blessed. She then knelt down, thank you young noble for burying my father and mother. At least their bodies would not be exposed to the wilderness. Your grace and kindness is something this slave will never forget for life. Seeing as how her words were extremely refined, Ling Tian could not help but ask with surprise, Xiaoya, do you know how to recognize words? Have you studied before? Xiaoya then replied bashfully, father was a scholar before and had been a private tutor for a period of time. It was my father who taught me. The moment she mentioned her father, her eyes could not help but turn red. Ling Tian then replied, I see. Looking at how Xiaoya hid to a corner, Ling Tian smiled and said, come here, come to my side. It is warmer here. Xiaoya then shook her head in fright, young noble, this servant's body is extremely dirty and smelly. I will just stay by the door. As she said that, she bit her lips with a face full of shame. Ling Tian shook his head and stretched his hands out, pulling her in. He then made her sit down beside him where it was near the heater. Xiaoya was extremely touched as she sat there upright, looking ever more rigid than Ling Jian who was like a wooden pole. Xiaoya indeed did not smell good, and this was something that Ling Tian had noticed ever since she entered the carriage. Mr. Qin's nose twitched for a moment as he slowly shifted his body to face the outside. In Ling Tian's heart, there was a sense of familiarity and closeness which he had not felt for a long time. The smell on Xiaoya's body was extremely similar to the times he was leading a bitter life. Ling Tian could not help but hug Xiaoya as his eyes became teary. Perhaps the only thing that is similar to my previous life is this smell. Perhaps, only with this, will I know that I do not belong to his world. As Xiaoya was hugged by Ling Tian, her body stiffened as she felt a sense of peace and security she had never felt before. She sat there without moving as 2 streams of tears rolled down her cheeks. Father, mother, did you guys see that? Xiaoya had met a good master. Xiaoya will have a good life in future, rest assured. While she was still in a daze, Xiaoye heard the gentle voice of Ling Tian, "From now on, your name will be called Ling Chen. There will be no one else who will ever bully you." Xiaoye did not dare to open her mouth, afraid she would burst out into tears the moment she do so. She only nodded her head in Ling Tian's bosom as she thought to herself, "From now on, I am called Ling Chen. Ling Chen who only belongs to the young master." Chapter 60. Grandmother and Grandson's Secret Plan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 60. Grandmother and Grandson's Secret Plan. Translator. Chuchitrain Editor. Sell. By the time the carriage arrived back at the Ling mansion, it was already deep into the night. The moment the news of their return traveled to the anxiously waiting old Madame Ling and Chu Tinger, they hurriedly made their way over. Seeing his bodyguards in a multitude of injuries, and furthermore missing a few of them, the two women could not help but gasp in shock. Ling Tian leaped out from the carriage, provoking old Madame Ling and his mother Chu Tinger to reproach him for a period of time. Ling Tian merely laughed, signaling with his eyes before saying, "Let's go back to the room to talk." Old Madame Ling and Chu Tinger were both experts in the art of picking up details, so how could they not catch his meaning? Thus they both agreed. Ling Tian also mentioned that he brought back a little girl and Chu Tinger did not fuss over it, asking some hands to help the girl get cleaned up. Seeing how Ling Tian meticulously took care of her, Chu Tinger felt her heart warm, and could not help but tease, "Tianer, why not I ask this little girl to be your maidservant?" Ling Tian laughed in embarrassment, scratching his head. Seeing this, Chu Tinger could not help but laugh out as well, patting him on his head. Inside old Madame Ling's chambers, old Madame Ling listened with a heavy face to the ambush and attacks that Feng Mo recounted. On the side, Chu Tinger covered her mouth in shock. She immediately grabbed Ling Tian, drawing him into her embrace to scrutinize him, making sure he was not injured in any way. After she was convinced Ling Tian was unscathed, she announced that from today onward, Ling Tian was not allowed to move around alone. Unless it was a major issue, he was not allowed to step out of the Ling mansion. Hearing this, Ling Tian flew into a panic. He could not be bothered about the fact that old Madame Ling was in deep thought, hugging her arm and shaking it back and forth. If his mother were to really set this rule, then he would have to imitate a noble family's only daughter, living a sheltered life as a caged pigeon. Ling Tian felt a rare sense of fear at that thought. Old Madame Ling tenderly patted his head before speaking to Chu Tinger, "Tinger, it is not a good thing for a little boy to keep cooped at home. After all, you can't take care of him for his whole life, and even an eaglet who grows up only being under the mother eagle will not be any good. Furthermore, I have already assigned experts to be near Ling Tian, he will be safe." While Chu Tinger still felt a twinge of heartache, she did not dare to rebut her mother-in-law, and thus could only agree in an aggrieved tone. Touching on the topic of the expert-level bodyguards, Ling Tian had his own thoughts as well, saying, "Grandma, this time's incident really gave me a scare. After today, Tianer has found out that those by my side that can be deployed are truly few and between." This caused the old woman to burst into laughter. "You little rascal, do you even understand what fear means? Don't lie to me, you just took a liking to your father's blood iron warriors, right?" Ling Tian could only let out an embarrassed smile as he replied, "They're really not bad. Very good, in fact." How could Madame Ling not be able to guess his intentions? She merely laughingly scolded him, saying, Good, then I will have a word with your father tomorrow. Feng Mo's section will then stay with you and not return to their squads." Hearing such a thing, Ling Tian practically jumped for joy, exclaiming, "Thank you, Grandma." He was overjoyed in his heart. With this few blood iron warriors filling up his own lack of manpower, things would be able to proceed at a smoother pace. Furthermore, the best part about them was that their loyalty was definitely without question and that they were already used to the discipline of obeying in the army. Just this 2 points was what Ling Tian valued the most. Ling Tian subconsciously stretched out his fingers as he began to plan. First was the matter of the Violent Wind Gang, for Blood Iron warriors could be sent there to ensure things stayed under control. Secondly was the matter of King Fu's courtyard. Someone had to be there to survey the scene as well. Thirdly would be the matter of recruiting more helpers. Fourth would be the military workshop. The fifth would be, this time he had really struck the jackpot. Of all the problems buried in his heart, at least half were settled in this short while. Old Madame Ling looked as though she had been completely exhausted of strength, lightly rubbing her temples. Seeing this, Chu Tinger glanced at Ling Tian and said, "It is already late in the night, you should get some rest, mother. Tianer, you should also go to bed." This moment, old Madame Ling's eyes gleamed as she calmly spoke. "Tinger, you have also been working for the whole day, you should go get a rest. As for Tianer, I would like to have a few words with him first." Chu Tinger expressed her agreement. "Yes, mother." Ruffling Ling Tian's hair, she continued. "Listen to your grandma's words and don't be willful. Be good, Tianer." Before she left the room. In the room, the older and younger generation both sat there staring at each other, giving out weird smiles. Madame Ling suddenly opened her eyes wide, seeming as though her previous fatigue had all but disappeared. Obviously, it was all a farce she pulled off just now. Looking at Ling Tian, she spoke, "Speak. Why are you still hesitating?" Ling Tian gave a bitter smile, thought about it, before deciding to reveal all of his machinations. "What?" Madame Ling was so shocked that she shot straight up from her chair. "Did you really ask for the armory that the Shao family is in charge of?" That's right. I went to look for him to request for compensation, and he just handed that workshop over to me. What's wrong with that?" Ling Tian pretended to be naive and asked in doubt. Since there was no possibility of Xiao Fenghan revealing what exactly happened, and Mr. Qin who was riding on his trousers would all the more keep his lips zipped. Thus, Ling Tian was not afraid of spilling any secrets. "What's wrong with that?" "There are many things wrong." Madame Ling was so agitated that she stood up from her chair. Pacing around the room, she continued, "This workshop is an important military base for the Shao family inside Sky-bearing Empire. According to the Ling family's confidential reports, at least 5,000 elite troops are hidden inside the workshop. With so many soldiers inside the heart of a country, what kind of imbalance can that cause? Even bringing down the capital would not be surprising. But now you're telling me that Xiao Fenghan handed it over to you meekly. I'm really beginning to wonder what sort of evil intentions he has by doing so." Ling Tian smiled to himself, thinking, well, he did not exactly meekly hand it over, I sort of forced him to do so. Under such conditions, he had no choice but to actually hand it over. However, even a kid knew what to say and what not to, let alone him. He only replied with, "Maybe the Shao family head saw that I was a genius, and decided to build a good relationship with me." The originally severe expression of Madame Ling softened into one that was between crying and laughing, and stretched out a finger, pointing it at Ling Tian's head, saying, "You genius! If you were that good, then that old fellow would not bother to try to annul the marriage. This matter smells fishy." Ling Tian scratched his head and smirked. No matter what tactics he has, so long as Grandma swaps all the manpower within the workshop, and pass the Shao family's troops over to Grandpa Ling, he will have no eyes and ears there anymore, let alone cause any waves. Old Madame Ling glared at him. "That's easy for you to say. If Xiao Fenghan has any ulterior motives and decides to use this chance to drag our entire Ling family inside, how would he allow letting his men be moved out? This matter might not be as simple as it seems." At this point, Ling Tian gave a shifty smile as he said. "In this point, Grandma need not worry, your grandson here has already gotten family head Xiao to agree that when he journeys home a few days later, he would bring whatever he deems important along with him. Thus, Grandma just has to ensure that we find the necessary people to replace his people, and that will be fine." This made old Madame Ling even more at a loss. She could not make head or tails of what Xiao Fenghan was scheming about. After 30 years of close relations, Madame Ling had a profound understanding of how her husband's sworn brother never failed to have deep plans and distant thoughts. Not only was his schemes extremely huge, his thoughts were also meticulous and could be said to be flawless in his calculations. Everything he did had a purpose, and would never allow himself to be at a disadvantage. However, the matter of him giving out his military workshop had no advantage whatsoever to the Xiao family, and she could not help but think, did Xiao Fenghan have a change in his nature? Or is the great plan of the Xiao family coming to a halt? However, based on her observations the last few days, both did not really seem plausible. Forget it, since there is no good reason, then might as well plan it step by step. Everything should be done cautiously. Now that the military workshop is in my hands, Xiao Fenghan, you can forget about carrying out any nefarious schemes or going back there. Both paths will be closed to you from now on, thought old Madame Ling.